All right, so this is the AMA session meant for helping students from RI who's going to have a test this week about on KEI and SOL. We're here to answer your questions. So if you have any questions, please feel free to type it into the comments section and I will answer the questions accordingly. Yeah, if there's a document you need to send to me to let me check, let's say if there's a table or chart or graph, then please screenshot that and WhatsApp to me, right? If you're my student, so just send a WhatsApp to me. Right, so what is the difference between real GDP per capita versus PPP GDP per capita? Okay, so let's answer your question. The question is, hang on, let me show the question on the screen so everybody can see. So the question is, what's the difference between real GDP per capita and PPP GDP? Assume it's per capita also, okay? So both are per capita. So real GDP versus PPP GDP. So we first go back to the definition of what is GDP. GDP is the total market value of all goods and services, or all final goods and services produced, right, in an economy over a given period of time. So how do you measure GDP? So GDP, right, will be summing up all the, okay, maybe I just don't use summation. So I use good one times good one's price times good one's quantity, good two's price times good two's quantity, good three's price times good three's quantity, and then I add all the way until N goods, right? All the goods in the economy. So that's your GDP, which is the total market value, meaning price times quantity, market value of goods and services produced in a country. So the question is, what price is this? Is this current price or is this base year price? If it's current price, then this will be called nominal GDP. So GDP is valued today based on today's prices. But if we were to use base year prices to calculate GDP, to give the value of output, right, then this GDP becomes real GDP. So what is real GDP? Real GDP is a measure of the value of output in a country produced in a year based on the prices of those goods that occurred in the base year, not based on the not the current prices, but the base year prices. Now, what's the point of measuring real GDP? The point of measuring real GDP, right, is that if real GDP change from year one to year two, right, then only the quantities that are changing that gets recorded, because any changes in price doesn't get recorded because real GDP always gets stuck with the base year prices. So real GDP is particularly useful, right, for comparing changes in economic growth or changes in income of people over time. So real GDP is more used for intertemporal comparison of GDP, of standard of living, for example. Now then, what's PPP? PPP, right, is a very special thing. So suppose we begin with nominal GDP, as I explained just now what nominal GDP is. Right, for those of you who still miss, right, nominal GDP is just the total market value of final goods and services produced in a country based on today's prices. So nominal GDP measured in our own currency. So let's say Singapore's GDP, right, measured in Sing dollar. If I want to compare with USA's GDP, right, which is measured in US dollars, it's not comparable. So I need to convert, let's say, into US dollars, right, to get Singapore's GDP. So this is Singapore's nominal GDP, still nominal. We haven't changed what we're measuring. So this is nominal GDP. This is nominal GDP. What has changed now is after converting to US dollars, we get Singapore's GDP measured in US dollars, right? Instead of measured in our own currency, which is Sing dollars. So how we convert? So this conversion is done using what is called the market exchange rate. The market exchange rate is the rate at which people can literally convert US dollar to Sing dollar in the free market, right? That's the market exchange rate to get Singapore's nominal exchange rate. Now the PPP GDP, or rather Singapore's PPP GDP, measured in US dollars. Now this is the thing that you're asking, what is nominal GDP? PPP GDP, right? So notice the word change already, nominal change to PPP. It's actually calculated from nominal GDP, but we convert to US dollars using what is called the PPP exchange rate. So instead of using what is known as the market exchange rate to convert, we use this special exchange rate called PPP exchange rate, which takes into account the differences in prices between countries. Right, so unlike real, which is more of a measure of GDP, so that when we do over time comparison, right, we are able to account for inflation or ignore the effects of inflation. PPP is meant for comparing between countries in order to be able to account for differences instead of changes in prices, differences in prices between countries. So now going back to your test, which is like this week, right? When do you use real? When do you use nominal? So you got to remember about international comparison between countries at a point in time, or intertemporal comparison within a country over different period of time. So if the data is they give you some data and they ask you compare how the people's standard of living of the people in this country have changed over the last 5 years, then that's intertemporal comparison. That means you use real values. But if they're asking you to compare country A and country B's people's standard of living, then that's between countries. That's called international comparison. That's when you use PPP value. Right, so I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't fully address your question, please follow up with more clarifying questions. Right, whoever is not Mario 16. If there's any part that I explained that is not clear to you or need me to repeat, just ask. I think maybe it's a bit early. It's only 8:09 p.m. I think very few people are online, maybe still having dinner. It's okay, I'll be around. When you got questions, just key in and ask. Those of you who are online already, please take advantage of the fact that very few people are online now and ask as many questions as you need. All right, so I have follow-up question from Not Mario 16. Would the benefits of PPP GDP per capita be the same as real GDP per capita, only difference being international rate adjustment for equal prices? Sorry, my whiteboard isn't. Thank you for telling me that. I'm so sorry about the whiteboard being not showing. Yeah, so Mario, not Mario, please screenshot this if you need to. Right, so I run through again. So nominal GDP measured in own currency, convert to US dollars to nominal GDP. So when we measure in a foreign currency, we have to do conversion. When we convert using the market exchange rate, then we get back nominal GDP except in a different currency. But if we convert using what we call the PPP exchange rate, then we get to the US dollar version of Singapore's PPP GDP, which is a different thing, right? So this account for differences in prices between countries. So now to answer your question, your second question, right? Whether the benefits of PPP versus real, right, are the same in that they account for equal prices. Yes, they are, but no, not exactly. So one is account for differences in prices between countries. So if you don't convert to PPP, right, then you are implicitly assuming that the two countries' prices are similar, which may not be true, right? So you say we don't want to make the assumption, so we want to take into account any price differences. So PPP helps us do that. But when you do real, right, what real does? Let me go back to my previous screen. What real does, right, is to use the base year prices to calculate this. Then what real does is to account for changes in prices over time. So in a sense, is it a adjustment for equal prices? Yes, it's equal prices last year to this year. So change over time is ignored. Whereas between countries is this year and this year, different countries, let's assume prices are actually we don't assume prices are the same for PPP. We assume prices aren't the same and we take into account the difference. Right? So PPP actually recognizes that prices are different and we adjust. Okay, so instead your term, what you wrote here, not Mario, you wrote here as exchange rate adjustment for equal prices. PPP actually adjustment for unequal prices, right? PPP take into account the prices are different, right? Then but real, right, is to account for the fact that prices are different by ignoring the differences in prices over time, the changes in prices over time rather. Okay, I hope that was clear. It may not have come across as very clear. Please feel free to follow up. Okay, so your next question. So essentially, PPP would be used to show the differences in purchasing power between countries, yes, and as such would always be nominal. No way to take base year, correct, right? Because PPP, right, is to compare two different countries at the same point in time. Base year is always about over time, right? So base year is now versus last time. PPP is for comparing now versus now in two different countries. So you will never ever use base year prices. You always use nominal to convert, correct? Just that after we convert, we don't call it nominal, we call it PPP GDP or PPP GDP per capita. All right, for those of you who just came on to the live, this is for you to ask any questions you want regarding the test that is upcoming. So any questions you want to ask, you can ask on SOL, KEI. If you have a data set that you want me to go through and you want to show me the data set, you can WhatsApp to me. Can't really see who is online. All right, I have Ian asking a question. To explain how to use PPP GDP per capita for COL, do we have to say compare to exchange rate? Oh, I don't get your question, Ian. What do you mean by do we have to say compare to exchange rate? So if you wish to compare COL, right, to compare COL of, let's say, a country, let's choose a random country, let's say Singapore versus USA. Now let's assume USA is the reference country. Then the only two pieces of information I will need, right, is Singapore's nominal GDP, right, or GDP per capita, up to you. So with or without per capita not important. Right? You can use per capita, you can use without per capita, depending on what information is given. And then we also need to use Singapore's PPP GDP per capita, right? Now both are measured in US dollars, right? So this one is important to note. This is already measured in USD. This one also measured in USD. Right, so both are measured in US dollars. So for instance, if this is Singapore's GDP per capita measured in US dollars, is let's say $90,000. I'm going to round off to one significant figure. And then if you look at our PPP, right, our PPP is let's say 150,000 US dollars, for instance. So these two numbers are both for Singapore value. So I emphasize both numbers are for Singapore value. So 90,000 is the GDP per capita in Singapore in Sing dollar, convert convert using market exchange rate to US dollars, we get 90,000. But if we were to convert the Sing dollar GDP per capita in Sing dollar to US dollar using PPP exchange rate, right? Then we get 150. So let me write this down. So Singapore's nominal GDP per capita measured in SGD, if we were to convert using market exchange rate to US dollars, right? Then this is the GDP per capita in nominal terms in US dollars. If we were to convert using PPP exchange rate between Singapore dollar and US dollar, then we get the PPP GDP per capita, right? So this is the way we would do the comparison. Now, how to draw a conclusion? So to draw a conclusion, right, the first thing you need to do is to remember what these numbers mean, right? $90,000 is what we have. Well, we don't technically have. We have the Sing dollar equivalent, right? We can take our Sing dollar, go to the forex market, exchange this for $90,000. But what can we buy with this $90,000, right? We can buy a basket of goods and services in Singapore using this $90,000 that if an American were to buy the same goods and services but buy it in America, the American will need $150,000. So taking into account that things in America are more expensive, to buy the same things that we can buy with 90K, Americans will need 150K. So us having 90K, right, is equivalent, right, to having the purchasing power of 150K in America. Now then, comparing these two numbers, right, notice we didn't even look at US values. We don't look at USA's GDP per capita. We only look at Singapore's GDP per capita, nominal versus PPP. Then we can conclude that the same basket of goods and services that cost $90,000 in Singapore cost more, right? Cost 150K in USA. That's how we compare COL between countries, right? So this is comparing a country against the reference country scenario. Okay, so I hope that answers your question, Ian. Like I say, if I'm going a bit too fast, you need me to repeat any part of this, just ask for it and I will repeat for you. Can you explain inclusive and sustainable growth? Sure. Whoever this is, Vias. First, before I answer your question, right? Because your test this coming Thursday or Friday is going to be a case study test, right? So it is less likely that you will be tested about inclusive and sustainable growth. Less likely doesn't mean it will not happen, right? So hang on, Ian, so don't need to bring in market exchange rate. No, you do, right? Ian, you need to bring in market exchange rate because it is how you get the 90,000. To compare COL between Singapore and USA, you needed Singapore's GDP per capita in US dollars, right? And that's calculated using market exchange rate, right? That's calculated using market exchange rate. And then this one, PPP GDP per capita, is using the PPP exchange rate. Clarence Chia, you already graduated. Why are you still here on my live? You shouldn't be the NS now. All right. So Clarence, you miss econs lesson so much that you want to come and retake it. Hey, don't jinx it, the A-level result coming out. All right, so anyway, let's answer Via's question on inclusive growth and sustainable growth. So under economic growth, as a macro aim of the government, we have actual growth and we have potential growth. And then there's a separate branch of it called inclusive growth and sustainable growth. So let's talk about inclusive growth first. What is inclusive growth? Inclusive growth, right, basically is about achieving economic growth in a country in a way that I guess leave nobody behind. So in a lot of societies, right, in a lot of capitalist societies especially, right, we notice, the economists notice, right, as a country experiences economic growth, the rich gets richer, the poor gets richer, but the rich gets richer far faster than the poor, causing a widening of income gap. And that in turn can cause social issues in a country, right? So the social issues have then eventually morphed into more political issues for governments around the world. So you have that, the people who want to rise up against the top 1%, for instance, right, protests around the world. So that has led to a new conversation in the world as to how do we achieve good economic outcomes for the country as a whole, while at the same time letting the benefits, right, benefit everybody, right, or benefit as many people as possible. So this brings to a question, right, that should we maybe encourage the rich to just work hard and earn money and take risks, but then whatever they earn, we reallocate or redistribute via taxes from the rich and use that to give money to the poor or fund welfare programs for the poor. So you could, but then if you look at how the communists have experimented with this a few decades ago, found that not very helpful, not very effective, because it took away a lot of incentives for people to work hard, right? So so many different countries are grappling with this. So what is Singapore's solution to sustainable growth, right? Singapore's solution to sustainable growth is to use the tax dollars that we collect from people who are successful, right, to then create things that empower the poor to be able to have upward mobility, right? So instead of just take the money from the rich and give to the poor, it doesn't empower the poor to become better off on their own. So then we prioritize focusing on things like improving education, improving healthcare, improving transportation, give people mobility, give people access to knowledge, provide subsidies for causes, right? Good libraries where people can get information, affordable high-speed internet. So all these are stuff that we focus on to create a more inclusive society, such that when we achieve economic growth, we try to do it in a way where we bring up the masses, right? So generally speaking, right, then inclusive growth is about getting actual growth, right? That means real GDP per capita or real GDP is rising, as well as per capita rather. And then on top of that, right, you want the Gini coefficient to be falling, or even if it's not falling, then at least it stays low, right? That would be the general expectation of inclusive growth. Then what is sustainable growth? Sustainable growth is about trying to achieve economic growth in a way, right, that doesn't, I guess, pull the legs out from your economic growth in the first place, right? Like, for example, a country, right, that has a lot of natural resources might be tempted to rapidly extract natural resources to generate national income. So if I extracted, let's say I got oil and I extracted oil to sell at a certain rate, I get certain income levels. If I extract oil faster and faster, right, I get more and more and more economic growth, right? So that's having a high rate of growth. However, this growth method may not be so sustainable because the faster you extract your natural resources, the faster you deplete them. And once you deplete your natural resources, you no longer can fuel this kind of economic growth, right? So economic growth is about pacing. Sustainable growth is about pacing your growth in a manner that doesn't drain your resources quickly, right? And in the same way also, right, a country, so resources, not just natural resources like oil and minerals, right? Land also, for example, look at Singapore. Singapore's rapid economic growth, right, for certain periods of time have been have been achieved, right, via a massive increase in population, right? So we keep adding more people in this country, and that, of course, that's not the only thing that led to the growth in Singapore, but that played a role as well, right? So we keep adding population to this country, like during independence, right? We were like 2.1 million. Then in around 1990, we were like 3.6 million. Then after that, by 2011, we were like 5.1 million. Now we are 6.4 million people already and rising still. So is this sustainable? Is this method of growth, right, by getting more population, sustainable? If you keep adding more and more and more people, right, at some point, right, that overpopulation and overcrowdedness, right, spill over into negative externalities, make the country less conducive for people to stay in, to raise children in, and this might then cause people to leave, right? Talent might leave, local talent might relocate elsewhere, foreign talent may no want to stay here. So then that method of growth is not sustainable. So sustainable is about the method of growth. Can we count on this method to persist in the long run across generations, right? So that's the idea of sustainable growth. Right, so it's not just about achieving growth, right? The higher the better, but now we have to moderate that idea of growth in a way that is fair, brings about an improvement for everybody, so inclusivity, as well as sustainable, so that this growth can be persisted over generations, right? That's the goal. Not easy to achieve, right? In no way is it easy to achieve, but it's certainly the objective of governments these days. All right, so Vias, I hope that addresses your question. If you not, please should follow up with additional questions. What's the maximum mark for a CSQ can they test, and what would the question type be? Okay, so a CSQ, right? Okay, I don't know about your school test, whether they are testing the full CSQ, but you're talking about Cambridge exam or school prelim exam, right? So your CSQ is 30 marks in total. So in the 30 marks, right, it's split into what we call lower order thinking skill questions and higher order thinking skill question. The lower order thinking skill question is 12 marks and the higher order thinking skill is 18 marks. So your questions will normally have like A part 1, A part 2, B part 1, B part 2, C, then D, followed by E and F, right? So usually this will be the first 12 marks low order question, including data questions. Then E will typically be 8 marks and F will typically be 10 marks. So these are both what we call higher order thinking skills. So think of this as essay questions, right? Part B essays, accept fewer marks, right? So part B essays accept that they have fewer marks. So then what you will do is to use your standard part B essay structures. Those of you who have been in my class since JC1 would have learned the high order essay skills types, right? There are different types, like there's policy questions, there is usefulness of concept question, there's effects or event question, causes or event question. So there are different question types. However, right, because your school is testing only macro KEI, SOL, and macro aims this time round, right, then they surely wouldn't be testing policy question at all. Then they can test causes question, right? They can test the effects, they won't test. So causes, so what for KEI topic, KEI, SOL, macro aims topic, the HOTS question that they can test, right? Number one most popular HOTS question they can test is usefulness of concept, right? To what extent does the data support a certain viewpoint that SOL have changed or etc. Then two, they can test you about causes of event or causes of state, right? So this will be an essay question we went through in class before. To what extent does economic performance of a country influence the overall SOL of the people of a country? That means how important is economic performance to SOL? Are there other things beyond economic performance to matter to SOL? So that will be a second question type that is popular. Then the third question is more pertaining to macro aims, is desirability of state. So desirability of state question will be, if there were two macro aims, let's say in the extracts, right? They talk about the need to balance between price stability and employment. Which aim is more important for a government to achieve, in your opinion? Then that will be something they can also test. My hunch is that they won't test number three. The reason is because to answer number three, you normally need some macro models or ADAS understanding, which, although in theory you are supposed to have watched the lectures and read notes on your own, this is not a test on that topic. So I think the high order question will be 1 and 2. Now that's normal 30-mark question, 12 plus 18. Because your test will be held in a tutorial, it's a 1 hour tutorial session instead of a 1 hour 15-minute case study paper. My suspicion is that your case study will be around 20 marks only, just like what happened in the JC1 case study, where they will give you 12 plus 8. So that means your A1, 2, B1, 2, C, D. These are your lots question. This will be 12 marks. Then your E and F, right, which is supposed to be 8 marks and 10 marks, what your school is probably going to do is they're probably going to reduce one question. They're going to get rid of one question and to make it into a 20-mark case study so that they can fit it into the timing of 1 hour. Right? That's what I suspect your teachers will do. Okay, so that's my prediction. So question types will be usefulness of concept as well as causes of state, right? Whether SOL is affected more so by economic performance or more so by some other things. Or they can also ask, within SOL, is MSOL more important or is NMSOL more important, right? Or they can ask you, between these two countries, which country has a higher SOL? Like, for example, the worksheet that I went through with you all in November. For those of you who joined the class late, the worksheets are in Telegram, right? We had a quiz question about Singapore, USA versus Japan, right? Which country has a higher SOL? And then there was a Singapore versus, I can't remember which country we were doing. It was Singapore versus some other country, somewhere in Europe, I think. Yeah, so that was the second case study. So that kind of question they can test, right? So I assume not, Mario, you are my student, so please go to the Telegram to look at the essay questions. Let me see if I can find the question here. This is KEI SOL data question. This is Serbia, yeah, Singapore and Serbia question. So yep, so that's on the CSQ. That's on the CSQ worksheet I gave you all in November. It's in Telegram. It has a QR code there to scan for answers. So you can try, not sure you scan for answers, that should open a link to my TikTok page where I recorded a video to explain the answer. If you don't have TikTok, go watch the thing using the web-based version. Right? You don't have to download the app if you don't want to. All right, next question, please. Right, for those of you who are just coming on, I'm just sitting here waiting for questions to be asked. So if you scroll up and you see the list of questions that people ask, what you can do is you can later on replay the video at the various section where you can see how I answer those questions, if any of those questions are relevant to you. But if you are too lazy to scroll and then you just, for any question, just type in and ask. Pranav, are you still there? I just got a reaction from Chaturvedi. Oh, any other questions? Or you're just waiting for other people to ask? Don't shy, you don't even need to tell me who you are. While waiting for the next question, just a reminder, this week we are continuing with ADAS in class. So we are going to go into AS curve this week. All right, so a new question came up. What would be the limitation of using GDP and GNI? So, okay, first, what is GDP and what is GNI? What is the difference, right? GDP is the total market value of what is produced within a country, regardless of who produces it. So a Malaysian in Singapore producing goods and services, the value of those goods and services are calculated as part of Singapore's GDP. However, right, because a Malaysian in Singapore who may be working here on work permit, right, they are not our citizen of this country, right? Then what they produce, although it counts as our GDP, it doesn't count as part of our GNI. Gross national income measures the value of output produced by the people of that country, not the people in the country, but people of that country. So which means that Singaporeans who work overseas, right, the value of what they produce will still count as the GNI of Singapore. So this is slight difference in how we calculate, but essentially they are measuring value of production, right? So they are similar. So what are the limitations of GDP and limitation of GNI? Generally, they are similar, right? In that when measuring the value of GDP or GNI, we don't get to measure things like non-marketed goods, right? So non-marketed goods are goods that are produced for own consumption, as well as produced for your immediate family members to consume, for which there was no transaction, right? You don't actually collect money for the, let's say your mom washing your clothes, that you don't pay your mom money for it, right? Your mom buys you, cooks your dinner, you don't pay your mom for it. Your dad gives you a ride to school on the way to work, you don't pay your dad like you would pay a Grab driver. So a lot of the services and goods provided by our family members, or sometimes we do stuff for ourselves, it is not recorded in GDP because there was no transaction. So GDP underestimates, right, the true nature of what is produced in the country in any given period of time. Now, that in and of itself may not be a problem, because if you are doing change over time, comparing change in 1 year in this country to the next year in the same country, what is underestimated in 1 year is likely to also be underestimated in the very next year. So then the underestimated components generally will cancel out more or less, right? So this becomes a bigger problem, right? When you compare between countries, what is non-marketed goods in one country may not be non-marketed goods in another country. So the amount of underestimation of what is truly produced, right, may differ a lot between countries when we use GDP and concepts of GNI, right? So this is one major issue. Related to this issue, of course, is the problem of shadow economy, right? So shadow economy, like non-marketed goods, right, are something that cause us to underestimate the true extent of production. But this time, not because there was no transaction. There is a transaction. It's just that the transaction doesn't get reported. So then the authorities who gather data will not have data about this, right? So this is how we have a problem with GDP or GNI. So these are what we call computational issues, is the way we calculate. But there are also what we call interpretational issues. When I see that GDP has increased in the country, they say, oh, but are people better off? So you say, okay, let's take into account population growth as well, right? So we take GDP per capita divided by population. And if that's increasing, right, then we conclude that on average per person, people are better off, right? And that's good, right? However, what if the income isn't distributed in a way that is relatively fair, right? What if, right, the GDP per capita shows an increase, right? But in reality, vast majority of people experience little to no increment, right? That majority of the increase in income ended up in the hands of the minority rich. Then in that case, right, the limitation of using this GDP even per capita to draw conclusions about changes in SOL becomes less and less reliable. So this is where we have a limitation in using these indicators to draw conclusions, as opposed to the first set of limitation. The first set of limitation is the limitation in terms of the way we calculate it, we might miss out stuff, right? That therefore give us an inaccurate measurement. Second type of problem is that even if we assume we have measured correctly, right, there will still be an interpretational problem that we might draw wrong conclusions from the information given. Right, so these are the general two kinds of limitations: computational issues and interpretational issues. My room is quite dark. Lighting is not very good. I need to get a proper lighting here. Right, those of you who are watching this record, who will be watching this later, for the recording, right? There will be long pauses like this where I'm waiting for the next question to come up, right? So you can just like forward every 10 seconds, 20 seconds to skip past while we're waiting. All right, any more questions that you have? Maybe 8 p.m. is too early for you guys to have live. I think many people still not at home yet. How do we frame NMSOL? What indicators can we choose to ensure it doesn't get linked to income? I.e., example, cannot use public goods since they are entirely reliant on tax, which is correlated to income. No, you can talk about public goods, right? But you don't have to. So like NMSOL, right, refer to things that are more intangible aspect of the quality of life. So instead of things like things that like goods and services we buy, if I earn more income, I can buy more things. I can buy more material things. I buy more food, buy more entertainment, buy more clothing, buy more cars, buy more electrical appliances, right? So these are stuff I can buy. But then when we talk about non-material SOL, right, we are referring to things like, do people get to educate their children, right? When people are sick, can they do they get access to healthcare? And the healthcare they manage to access, is it of a good quality of healthcare, right? Do people enjoy a peace of mind in their country that frees them from worry about when I step out of the house, right? I worry about being mugged, being robbed, right? Or I have to constantly worry about invasion from another country, right? Or bombings, right? So these are a sense of security and a peace of mind that people can enjoy and they value. So, for example, in Singapore, right, there's something that we don't even think of, right? That when we get out of the house, when we get out of the house to go to school, we don't think about bombings, right? We don't think about robberies, right? Lots of you, right, will go to a hawker center, put down your wallet, right, to choke your seat while you go order your food. Sometimes or you even leave your handphone on the table and then you walk to a store far, far away, right? Why do you enjoy this peace of mind, right? It's because we enjoy a very, very low crime environment. Of course, the police force will remind you low crime doesn't mean no crime, right? But the idea is that this what we have achieved in this country, right, is a sense of security, right? That people don't feel that stress about worried about robberies and stuff. Like for example, sometimes, right, if people leave the house to go and buy stuff, then they left the house, they think, hey, did I lock my door? Then you're like, never mind, I'm just going to buy stuff for half an hour and come home. So people are generally not as worried, right? That's primarily because of the level of peace of mind they already enjoy. So these are non-material as well. Then, but you might say, then isn't that linked to income? Doesn't the government have to provide for police force? Sure, right? We can talk about it. So how it is financed, how these non-material aspects or as well is financed, right? Is not is not relevant to whether that point is a good point or not. So these are non-material aspects. So then to address your question, right? Not Mario 16, to address your question, right? So don't have to avoid talking about NMNSOL in connection with economic performance, because, right, one of the things that we will argue in some of the exam questions, right, is how economic performance can enhance NMSOL too, right? How with economic performance, the government of a country gets to collect more taxes. With more tax revenue, that puts the government in a better position to improve both the accessibility to social services like education, like healthcare, as well as to improve on the quality of those social services, right? So the government with more tax revenue can give us a better public transport, right? A very public transport network, a better healthcare system, right? A better education system. All these are improving non-material SOL, and they can be funded by higher taxes that the government earns when there's economic growth. So they don't have to be mutually exclusive. You don't have to go out of your way to separate the two. Right, so then when you now answer your first question, what indicators, right, can we choose to measure, right? You can choose any indicator. You can choose any indicator that is measuring either the outcome variables or the enabling factors. For example, right, if let's say you want to talk about quality of healthcare, so you can measure healthcare outcome indicators. For instance, right, life expectancy, infant mortality rate. These are the healthcare outcome indicators. But if you want to measure enabling factors, right, you can talk about what is the number of doctors per 10,000 people in the country, right? Hang on, I need to reply on question to Aiden. All right, so yeah, so this is two kinds of indicator. One can measure enabling factors, the other one measure outcomes. So I'll give you another example, education. You want to measure enabling factors. What if the government has more resources, can give us better quality education? How does that come? How does that manifest? How might that manifest? You can talk about maybe class sizes, right? Teacher to student or teacher to pupil ratio, right? The teacher to pupil ratio is such that there are more and more teachers per, or rather fewer and fewer students in the class. Then that in theory improves education, right? But if you think about, let's say, when you measure outcomes, right, then what percentage or what cohort of our students, right, make it into the maybe top universities in the world, for instance, right, might be an outcome indicator. Okay, I hope that answers your question. All right, got any other questions, please just key in the comment section and I will address them. So not Mario 16, I hope I was able to answer your question. Anybody who is OGL who is not able to attend classes on the weekday this week, please go and arrange for makeup on my makeup slots on the weekend. Don't wait until tomorrow, don't show up. I text you and ask you where you are. Then you say, oh, sorry, I couldn't come. How are the different accounts arranged, and why can we take BOTs that's the same as BOP? You can't, right? You technically can't. The balance of payments of a country, right, measures all monetary inflows and all monetary outflows, right? So money that comes into a country and money that leaves the country. The BOP is made up of two accounts, what we call the current account and what we call the capital and financial account. Right, so these are the two accounts. In shorthand, we write CA for current account and KFA for capital and financial account. In the current account itself, we have 4 sub-accounts. So this is called balance of trade in goods, and you have the balance of trade in services. So basically, it's the X minus M of goods and X minus M of services. Together, this is called BOT, right? So the BOT is a subset of the current account, and the current account is a subset of the balance of payment. Okay, so first get it clear first. The BOT is the X and X minus M for goods and X minus M for services put together. You can also rephrase it as the X minus M of goods and services, right? So that's your balance of trade. It is a subset of CA. So CA itself contains 2 other accounts. At this stage, not very important to go and know what these 2 are, right? And then CA itself is a subset of BOP. So How are the accounts arranged? This is the way the account is arranged. Why we can take BOT as the same as BOP? We can't, right? We can't take BOT as the same as BOP. In the exam, under the current syllabus, the macro aim of a government is to achieve a favorable balance of trade position. That means the macro aim today is anchored onto this portion of the balance of payment. That means you are not even really interested in talking about KFA or even the other two sub accounts under CA is not the priority where we are focusing on. So rather than say treat BOT as the same as BOP, think of it as the examiner under macro aims chapter will only test you about BOT. They won't test about CA, they won't test about KFA. But if they ask a question about CA, you can in the essay focus on BOT and pretend that the BOT is the whole of CA. Right? That means you ignore whatever these are the last two guys. Incidentally, these last two guys who are missing, they are called primary income balance. You don't have to worry about what they mean at this point, right? And secondary income balance. Right, so for the upcoming test, this part is not really that important. Just so you know, if your questions that you want to ask me is not limited to today only, that on the live stream. This is just for people like whoever is available, right? So if over the next couple of days, if you as you're studying and you still got questions, feel free to text me and ask anytime, right? I'm new to this YouTube thingy relatively. I still don't know how to see who is online. Is there a way to see? I can't really see it. So yeah, I play with this for a while. Oh, I could do this. Oh, I could do this. Yeah, still doesn't look nice. If I do this. Oh, that makes me very big and the screen very small. Okay, let's do this. No, not this. This. Wait, no, that's not what I want. This. Sorry, since no questions are coming at the moment, I'll just fiddle with this. Oh, no questions still? Can you go through hot answering techniques for the two common types of questions? Sure. Right. The two common type of questions for the CSQ, right? For this KEI topic. So first, the two common hot question type for CSQ are usefulness of concepts. Right. Actually three, right? But so state of affairs, right, and causes of state. Three, but this one is the maybe less popular. It's more for essay. So usefulness of concept and state of affairs are the more popular ones. So usefulness of concept, right, will be an example, right? Is to what extent does the data in, let's say, tables 2 and 3, to what extent does the data in 2 and 3 support the view that country A's SOL has improved? Right? So let's say a question like this. So a question like this is, to what extent does the data support, right? So this is a question about whether the data is sufficiently useful or not. So then obviously you will use a thesis and antithesis structure in your main body of the essay, where in the main body, you will split into R1, which is MSOL, and R2 is NMSOL. Now, how we know this is because SOL will affect into material and non-material. So then within the M and NM part, right, you will have to have a thesis and entities. So since this is first R1, so you have T1A1, R2 will have T2A2, right? So this will be your main body structure. So T1 will be explaining how the indicators shown in the tables can allow us as economists, right, to draw a conclusion as to how MSOL might have improved, right? So explain how MSOL can be shown to have improved using the data shown in, let's say, table 2 and 3. Then A1, right, antithesis is to explain why we might doubt that conclusion. Like what's the reason why we might not necessarily 100% trust our conclusion? Is there something about the information that was missing that we had to assume, or was there something we are assuming that only if this assumption is true, then the conclusion is valid, and we're not sure whether the assumption holds? Like for example, right, your indicator might show that GDP per capita has been increasing, right? Real GDP per capita is increasing. Then what we're implicitly assuming, right, is that population, in the country, the distribution of income, right, was reasonably fair. But then your antithesis can be arguing that, yeah, we had to assume that, but maybe it might not be true, right? So you're questioning, you're casting doubt, right, on the validity of your T1 argument. Now that's not evaluation, that's just discussion. Your evaluation comes at the back, right? So your evaluation is at the back where you now make a judgment regarding your A1 paragraph's argument. Do you think that the problem that you raised, right, in the context of this particular case study is likely to be a very severe problem or not? And hence conclude whether the data in tables 2 and 3 are suitable or not for us to draw that conclusion. So that's how you would do your EV for R1. Then your R2, same thing, right? What information in the tables can we use to draw a conclusion about how NMSOL or one aspect of NMSOL might have changed? Then antithesis will be, okay, now that I've explained that, right? What might be a reason why I might doubt my own conclusion again, right? Is there an assumption I'm making that may not be true, or do I feel that there's too little information on NMSOL? There's only one aspect of NMSOL being shown, other aspects are not being shown. Then after that, after I do my thesis, I go to evaluate again. Do I think that this problem in A2 and A2 paragraph, is that a big enough problem for me to conclude that table 2 and 3 data is really not so useful, right? Or do I think that the problem is not so big a problem that the data in table 1, 2, and 3 are still good, right? So that's your judgment of the usefulness of the data in table 2 and 3. So this is the structure to answer this kind of question called usefulness of concept question. Now, state of affairs is different. State of affairs question, right, will be asking using the information in tables 2 and 3. Discuss whether country A or country B has had the higher level of SOL. Right, so the key phrase in this is using the info, discuss. So your action is discuss who has higher standard of living. The info is what supports your discussion. So you're not discussing the data, whether the data is good or no good. You're using the data to discuss a viewpoint, right? So essentially the two questions are very, very similar, but your thesis and antithesis argument is very, very different. In the first version, right, in the usefulness of concept question, your thesis is how is this data useful? Antithesis is how might this data be not so useful? Whereas your second approach, right, is to compare MSOL and NMSOL. So we split the essay first into R1. So R1 is compare MSOL in 2 countries and then compare NMSOL in the 2 countries. Then after that, you do your evaluation. Right, so in your R1, you'll be like, oh, I think country 1, right, country A, right, is likely to, based on the information, it seems like country A has the higher MSOL. This is because which indicators in the table show us that. Then your antithesis will be, however, that may not always be true also because there's some other indicator that suggests maybe country B could also have a higher SOL, or that you can say that the limitation, right, in the information given in table 2, right, table 1 and table 2 forces us to assume something about the data that may or may not be true. When to use per capita, when not to use per capita. When, okay, so this question, right, not Mario 16, you are asking a very, very difficult question to answer because there's no simple answer to this. Per capita is used when you want to look at on average per person how the country is doing. So if I ask you to compare China's GDP per capita, China's economic performance versus Singapore's performance, right? Then you cannot look at China's total GDP and Singapore's total GDP because then their total GDP is like huge, right? The China's total GDP is like 19 trillion US dollars, whereas ours, right, is 600 or 500 or 550 billion, right? So then our economy looks tiny compared to them. But then we have so few of us, right? There's 6 million of us to share in that small GDP, right? That we have one of the highest per capita GDP in the world. So when comparing, right, on average per person, per capita should be used. But if you're talking about economic growth, right, whether a country's income, whether a country's economy is growing one year to the next, then we don't really tend to look at per capita so much. We look at the total GDP in real value rising can already. One of the reasons is because population change, right, is unlikely to be very large over a very short period of time anyway, right? So you say that, oh, but this country grew at 10% last year. Wow, very large. But what if population grow at 12%? But which country's population will grow at 12%, one, right? So therefore, a 10% growth rate is very high, right? Surely will be higher than your population growth rate. So therefore, when you talk about comparing growth rate of economy, you don't have to use per capita. When you're talking about the standard of living of the people, then you have to divide by the number of people in the country. Right? That's how you should decide when to use, when to use per capita. Right, so coming back to this question that was asked earlier by MEUX2JH, right? So your R1 is compare MSOL, thesis and antithesis. R2 compare NMSOL between two countries, thesis and antithesis. Thesis is why I think country A or country B has a higher SOL, and antithesis is why my conclusion may not always be correct, right? Then after that, country NMSOL do the same. Then evaluation, make a judgment about which overall SOL, which country do you think has a higher SOL, right? So sometimes, right, you might get a weird situation where R1, you conclude that country A has a higher material SOL, and R2 is country B has a higher material SOL. Then you will have to evaluate from there whether material or non-materials is more important, right? So whoever you are, MEUX2JH, I will assume you are my current student. If then go into Telegram, I put in the case study 1 and case study 2 that I went through in November, December with answers. Please go to the worksheets there are questions like this, right? That test exactly this kind of question. Then there are two case studies that we question, and then I went through answers. So go and look through the way I explained in more detail. Right, so after you look through, if you got any follow-up question after today, right, text me and ask. If I'm assuming you are my student, if you're not, then join my class. All right, any more questions? All right, now since there are very few people left on the live, right? I tell you what, I'm going to answer questions for another 5 more minutes. If there are no more questions for after 5 minutes, right, then we'll probably close the live session early today. Then any questions you have to ask me after that, right? Please continue to text me and ask. I'll be glad to answer your text. What are the macroeconomic aims? The macro aims of governments, generally speaking, in your school is split into economic growth and macroeconomic stability. Under stability part is further split into what is known as internal stability and external stability. Under internal stability, you have price stability, which is to achieve a low and stable rate of inflation, and full employment, which is to achieve a low rate of unemployment equal to the natural rate. Then external stability is to achieve a favorable balance of trade position. Now, what exactly is favorable? That's controversial, right? Some countries' government prefer a surplus, other countries argue that equilibrium is better. But it doesn't matter. That's why the syllabus left it open-ended as favorable. Then, under economic growth, you can have what is called sustained economic growth, which includes actual growth and potential growth. Then you can have inclusive growth, as what was asked earlier in the video. And last one is called sustainable growth. So be careful with this term. Sustainable and sustained economic growth are not the same ideas, right? Sustained economic growth means a country must be experiencing actual growth, at the same time also experiencing potential growth, so that your actual growth can continue to be sustained when there is continued capacity expansion. So PBC shifts out, creating room for future growth to continue, so you can sustain your growth. Sustainable growth, right, is about not just this over time, but also across generations, right, of people in the country. So there's a much longer time frame. right? So it's about the method, also about the method of growth. So there are two slightly different things. So when we talk about macro aims of government, then what counts as macro aims? So here's the very neat trick, right? So you treat this as one aim, which includes both actual and potential. This as one aim, this as one aim, this as one aim. So normally, right, our macro aims classify into the 4 macro aims. Then what about this guy? What about sustainable growth and inclusive growth? Well, the general rule for the exam is this: if they don't ask for a sustainable growth or inclusive growth explicitly, right, then you don't talk about it, right? You don't bring up the two concepts if the question doesn't bring up the two concepts, right? If they bring up, you bring up. They bring this up in the question, you talk about them. They don't bring it up in the question, they don't mention the term sustainable or inclusive growth, you also don't need to mention them, right? So that's a very simple rule to follow, right? If they just say macro aims of government, then stick to the 4 yellow circles. For the question, assess the extent to which Singapore's economic performance is the main determinant of the population standard of living 15 mark. Can I do R1, economic performance determines SOL, GDP as in GDP as an indicator, A1 is limitation, then R2 non-material. Yeah, that's probably the way your RI teachers will want it. Not what I would recommend for A-level, but nonetheless, right, I don't think this will come out in the case study. This is an essay question, right? So your test tomorrow, this week is the test this week is a case study question, so unlikely to be tested. Wait, your teacher say cannot this method? Okay, I'm surprised because normally I thought that's the method they teach. As I said, not the method I would use. The method I would use, right, this is called causes. This is called a HOTS causes question. So the question is assess the extent to which okay, your question again. Your question is assess the extent to which Singapore's economic performance is the main determinant of. So assess the extent to which, say, A is the main determinant of B, right? So this suggests that A is a determinant of B. So I need to explain how economic performance impacts on SOL. Now here there are two arrows. So how economic performance affects MSOL, how economic performance affects NMSOL. So B, right, contains MSOL as well as NMSOL. Now, then what you need to do next, right, is to recognize that if we are discussing whether A is the main determinant of, right, there must be also other determinants that could be important and maybe even more important than A, right? So there has to be other determinants of SOL that is different from economic performance. So I need to look for something that affects SOL, right, that is different from economic performance. So I maybe choose, right, C, right, as something that affects material SOL other than economic performance. So maybe Gini coefficient, right? Maybe income distribution, not Gini coefficient, sorry, income distribution. So maybe C is income distribution. So A is economic performance, right? Then D could be non-tangible aspects of SOL, right? So maybe we can talk about quality of education, quality of healthcare, for instance. Okay, so this is the proper way to handle. But this answer itself, right, is longish, right? A bit long for 10 marks case study. This is more a 15-mark essay. Plus also, right, this question, if you look at the way it's worded, right, assess the extent to which economic performance is the main determinant of a population as well, it's less about the data. So it's less suitable to test in a case study question, more suitable to test in an essay question. So I wouldn't worry about this question for the case study test just yet. Right, so I'll probably worry about it more for prelim exams for your school at least. Okay, I hope that answers your question. Whoever this is, Kiao Kick Don FC 3268 has a very long nick. You are most welcome. For the question that require calculation for CSQ, do we write out the formula first? Not really, but it'll be nice to. If I don't see teachers penalizing you if you don't write the formula, but I also don't see them rewarding you if you got it, if you got the formula right but you get the answer wrong, right? They still won't give you the marks anyway. So yeah, I don't think it's a big deal if you didn't, but proper presentation answer should it's like you should wear a tie to a formal dinner, but if you didn't, people are not going to chase you up. That kind of thing. So yeah, just write. But if it cramps your style to have to write the formula and you choose not to write, I don't think anybody's going to be too bothered by it. As long as you get the right answer, right? What are the common KEI SOL question type for CSQ? I assume you mean the high order questions, right? So if it's high order question, right, it will be the types that I mentioned just now, which is the state of affairs question, right? Look, basing on the date. Let me go back to the previous page. Give me a moment. That's my mouse cursor. Right. So what I mentioned in the previous slide. State of affairs question will be like using the information in the tables, discuss which country has a higher SOL. So compare between two countries. Or the other type on the left, which is the usefulness of concept question, discuss the extent to which the data in table 2 and table 3 can support the conclusion that country A's SOL has improved. Right. So this is one question on the left is about assessing quality of data, sufficiency of data. The other question is on the right, which is like using the data, draw a conclusion, which country is doing better, which country is doing worse, in your opinion. Right? These are the two most popular type for KEI SOL questions, for high order question, and in a case study. Right? So for more actual practice, again, I assuming you are in my class, then go to my Telegram chat look at the answer, look at the 2 case study question on KEI SOL that I just uploaded like last week, and they come with answers, right? So go and check out how I answer those questions. Right, so if you, one of the case study, the answer is a video recording that you have to access via TikTok. If you don't have a TikTok account, then when you scan, it brings you to a website. You use the web version to watch without having to download, create an account. But if you have a TikTok account, it just opens to your app. The other one is just written answers, written in PDF format. Then you can just read off the answers to see how to approach this kind of question. So there was a Japan, USA, compare SOL using the data. And then there's also the Singapore, Serbia question. Okay, the number of people online have been dropping already, so I will assume that for now there are no more questions. So I will end the live early today. If anybody got any questions that you want to ask, follow up and ask some more, please feel free to just WhatsApp me and text me to ask questions. Right? Then yeah, otherwise I'll see you in class this week. Okay, then we're gonna end the stream here. Bye bye.